So we're really going to pretend we're at a radio station and we're going on to air in about 10 seconds. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Good afternoon, everybody. With me today, we have the president of Seniors Action Quebec, Mr. Michael Udy, and we have with us from the Petits Frères, Emmanuelle Singh. And we're going to be talking about a recent project that you've heard a great deal about, the GPS getting to programs and services for seniors. As you've heard earlier, that there's been a lot of activity going on in 4 different regions throughout Quebec. And we're now at the stage that we would like to find out what actually worked well, what are some of the best practices, and what we would be recommending to government to do. So I'm going to start with you, Michael, and then Emmanuelle, I'm going to ask you from your perspective, have you got a solution for maybe some of the things Michael will be bringing up, or is it very common and the only difference is language? Okay, so Michael, this project's been going on for like 21 months. And could you tell me, what would you say is 1 or 2 of the priorities that if you could change, you would change? And how would you do it differently? And what will be your recommendation in the final report to the funder?
So for things that I would change, the first one is that we have that the envelope of money that we had from ESDC was of a certain size. That's what we had to work with. And looking back, I think that we tried to spread that envelope too thin. We wanted to have as many partners as possible, try to have as much impact as possible. But I think in the light of experience that I would go back and do it differently. And I would have less partners with more resources for those partners.
What kind of resources did you make available to the partners?
Well, the principal resource was the compensation for the time of the local project leader. So that worked out to 1 day a week for each partner. It might sound like a lot, but once they got going, I think that what they saw was that it really wasn't enough. And the responsibilities sometimes for the GPS project would start to sort of spill into their other responsibilities for other things in their organization. So I think that I would look at that differently. I was wanting this to have as wide an impact as possible, but you know what happens when you can overshoot and then you end up undershooting. So that's one thing. The other thing, which is an obvious one to do with resources, is that we seriously missed the boat on the travel expenses. So obviously I would go back and I would do that differently because we just simply didn't understand what was involved. And it's to the credit of the partner organizations that they found a way to make this work. So that's one thing that I would change.
Also, I think it's important for our audience that's listening today to realize that this is a pilot project. It was social financing, so it meant that half the funding came from the government, the other half had to be raised by in-kind or donations. There's certain requirements or limitations. Were you able to, and I'm going to come to you, Emmanuelle, right after, were you able to offer any kind of compensation for out-of-pocket expenses to the volunteers who participated?
Well, the strict answer is yes, but it was really limited. There was some money that originally was planned to be used for something else that wasn't needed, and so we converted it. We got ESDC's permission to convert it into that kind of compensation. And this is in part where the gas cards came from. But even that, I don't think it was enough. So.
Fair enough. Emmanuelle, you've been doing outreach to socially isolated seniors for a period of time.
Yeah.
Have you encountered some of these similar problems, or are you more restricted to greater Montreal areas, so transportation, travel is not such an issue? Is it? And also, how do you address it?
Okay, it's pretty the same from or else Montreal. Well, you have the metro, but it depends because the mobility of the person is different. So people, their condition are different. So you can have public transportation, but the majority of people, it's difficult. So we funded we search for a fund, and we have the privilege to have 3 cars. And then, well, in Montreal, but we have it in Sherbrooke, 1 car. But volunteers are companion. So they're drivers and sorry about that. Their companion and also their drivers. So they collaborate, and then there's the damage. We pay for the kilometer and the gas too.
Where are you getting your funding resources to enable you to do that? Is there a specific government project?
No, 95% of our fund are private.
Okay.
So it's
donations.
Yeah, donation, and also companies that are funding our projects. And the transportation, so we got a bus too to go directly to our holiday, because we offer holidays to our elder friends, so we pick them up directly at their houses.
I also would assume that because of Montreal, we may have more buses, but the elevators, or the metros do not all have elevators.
Exactly.
Michael, from this project and experience that Seniors Action Quebec has undertaken, is there some thoughts, ideas, potential opportunities where you would like to approach whatever level of government for funding to address some of the issues that were highlighted in this? Like, you know, I see and I heard earlier, we were pleased Madame Charbonneau has offered or announced that there will be funding for equipment for people to remain in their home. But we have seniors who are perhaps not participating because of lack of snow removal, for one example. So is there any ideas or thoughts of how you could expand this project into another one, or is that not quite reached yet?
I'd say that we're not quite there yet, but there are a number of issues that have come up in the course of this project, which happen to coincide with issues that Seniors Action Quebec has already identified, like transportation, like housing, for example. And recently we had the experience of participating in the Montreal area, in the City of Montreal's consultation about seniors, and actually it was very handy to have both the information from the GPS project and the discussions that we had inside Seniors Action Quebec. It made us ready to participate in that kind of thing. And I would think that in other communities where you have a similar kind of consultation, that we could support local organizations with this kind of information, so that they would kind of have a package of things to advocate for, and they probably know these things anyway.
Would you say that one of your recommendations to the funder when we do the final report will be an encouragement to continue or expand similar type projects throughout the country? Also highlight some of the difficulties that were encountered so that they could be sensitized to perhaps address them, be it out-of-pocket expenses for volunteers, more staff time being allotted so there could be a better outreach or coordination, and especially assisting the volunteers with the paperwork we've heard so much about?
Just on the paperwork side of things, let's try and wrestle that to the ground. Because the money had come from the federal government, or really if it came from any level of government, we would feel the obligation to be able to report what had happened, like how was the money used, what was the result obtained. But I think the paperwork was a real frustration, and not just for us, but for the volunteers too. And I think that the focus really has to be, when you're thinking about doing something like this, is what is the data that you want to collect? And what's the least obtrusive way of collecting that data? We can talk about paperwork forever, but it's really about what's the data we need and what's the best way to collect it. The solution that they developed at North Shore Community Association was a really good one. because it got the data that we needed, and it was not obtrusive of the volunteers. And if you're trying to recruit volunteers, you don't want to be holding up things to them that say, that stop them from wanting to do it. So I think that's an important learning, actually, that if we did it again, we wouldn't talk about forms, and we would talk about what's the data and what's the easiest way to get it without obstructing anything. For the first part of your question, there's at least two ways to think about how can we go about reaching socially isolated seniors. Now, one of them is to have staff whose purpose it is to do that. And when Madame Charbonneau was here, she talked about the ITMAT programs. There are organizations in this room that have ITMAT programs. I think there's actually somebody in this room who is so there are people who are very familiar with it. So that's one route to go. And I think what this project has demonstrated is there is another route, and they're not mutually exclusive. And the other route is that you can involve volunteers, particularly seniors, but not exclusively, and you can structure it and train them. And I think I feel that we've heard that there's a tremendous amount of motivation that develops in those volunteers to want to do this. I think it's another valid way to reach socially isolated seniors. So I think that's going to be part of our report to government. And we've learned a few important lessons along the way about what do you have to do or not or avoid to support volunteers doing that.
Thank you. Emmanuelle, what does the Petits Frères do as far as how do they outreach and recruit volunteers, and what do they do as far as training and retaining their volunteers? Because especially if they're senior, they have health issues, family can have situations, they want to go down south for the winter, whatever.
Yeah, that's a big question because it's our main concern because we have about 2,000 volunteers around Quebec, and then yes, it is a challenge, and but we have people from all generations that are volunteers in our big family, extended family. And then I think, well, there's different ways of getting people to be engaged. We have different communication with the people that are on the ground, like ITMAV, we're directly working with them. We're working with the health people, so CHSLD, they're referring people to us, but also neighbors, people that sees situation and knows little brothers. So this is how to detect, but how to recruit is to know what we do, and then they come.
So I'm assuming that you're using the churches, the community centers, social media,
exactly,
all those newsletters.
Exactly. And then the training, we have a big program to welcome them, and then we give exclusive security. It's PDSB, so it's security, how to be with someone, to move the person. There's different training in between the interests of the volunteer, because we have different initiative, and then it depends what you want to do.
Okay, I think for the sake of time, we're almost hitting the clock. Michael, if you had some last comments or something that you would like to tell the funder or the community or both, what would they be?
Well, first, there are some things that we did in the context of the project which people talked about, and sometimes talked about them as being potential obstacles, but I think they're things that one has to tackle one way or the other. So, for example, Volunteers Canada has presented for organizations use a series of steps and standards when you're considering using volunteers, and I really think that those have to be used. You can't just do things willy-nilly. The second thing is that part of that involved the police checks, and we learned an awful lot about this business about police checks, more than we ever expected to learn. Because in some regions the police don't do those checks. They tell you to do something called a social inquiry, which we had never heard about before, but now we understand more about what it is. And actually I think that there's a room for a social inquiry. There's sort of gradations of information that you need, but the bottom line is that you can never ever say it doesn't matter. You can never say that we're going to, whether it's staff or volunteers, say we don't need to know anything more. Because everybody knows that unfortunately there are occasionally bad surprises, and we don't want to be in the business of facilitating bad surprises. So that's a second thing that I think we have to insist on.
While you're looking that up, Mike, I'd just like to add that I'm assuming that you would want to ensure that the volunteers, the organizations who you're partnering with, and also the clients that you eventually build trust and go and visit, are all protected. And then of course the overall organization has to be protected.
Yeah. Maybe rather than going through the list here, I'll just make one more comment, because it's something that I feel I've learned in the course of today. That when you want to make this outreach, it needs to be structured in the manner that we've described and that I've just referred to. But I feel that the presentations during the day have nonetheless put an emphasis on something else. And that is that you have to keep the focus on relationships. Relationships between the organization and its volunteers, and between the volunteers and the seniors. I mean, everybody has talked about that. And that's one of the things that I'm really happy about with today's symposium, is it's put the emphasis on that the project like this is really about relationships. And you have to build that in somehow into the design so that you allow those relationships to flourish and to be sustained. And you have to do that.
Would you have any last words, Emmanuelle? Because
yes, well, two of them with the relationships. We have a pairing program. It's we give the opportunity and the person to make a volunteer pairing with a senior, and it's incredible because it's in the time. So you could be in relation with the person 15 years. So there's an engagement for 1 year, and the person can see the other for once in the 2 weeks. But you see people that are together 15 years and seeing like a friend, but not just a friend, but a family member. So that's pretty incredible. That's the main, I think, thing in this relationship, and also partnership too. Because today I saw there's different challenges, but it's the same challenges for all organizations. So I think the key is to have partnership and reunion our strength.
So I would like to thank you. I'd like to compliment both of you on the work you're doing. Obviously there's a great need. There's going to be ongoing need, because we know our demographics and our seniors are expanding. There will be more and more of them. And I wish you good luck. And I think one of the challenges that we will be faced is for us to continue these efforts. And hopefully the 5 pilot projects that the federal government has funded will see the importance and the value and expand it. And also we've been able to find some new financial resources to help with the human resource and the financial resource opportunities down the road. So thank you very much for spending some time with me today, and we'll say goodbye.
I have a couple of comments. First of all, the agenda foresees us going on with the interview until 3:15, which I don't think we're going to do. And the other thing is that I want to thank this young journalist here, and I think she has a big future ahead of her.